as I did my research, I began to understand there's a very small group of people that influence all the companies that we watch. So they used to call them the Big Six. But Disney just bought Fox, and Disney controls Marvel, and Disney owns Lucas Studios. So look at that giant audience right here. Say a small group of people control the narratives and the content that we all see on all the channels. It makes you feel like, oh, I have lots of choices, but you don't. Who's telling them what to put on those channels?
Here in the United States, we're often brought up and told we don't have propaganda, that we have a hard-charging investigative press, we have this educated, skeptical, even cynical citizenry, and that if there were powerful interests trying to manage and manipulate public opinion, they would be exposed. The reality actually is just the opposite.
Washington, D.C. is definitely in Hollywood. I have seen documents of the DoD and the CIA writing to the studio heads, guiding them in certain fashion.
The CIA is funneling information into Hollywood. Hollywood is putting it out in the movies, and the population believes it.
Taxes to bury the Axis.
This document right here is a FOIA document. Anybody in America, anybody can request this. It's Freedom of Information Act. And in the 40s, they were telling you they controlled the radio stations. They controlled most of the mainstream media. They're telling you right here that motion pictures are used as psychological warfare.
Watch any big-budget war movie or take in a spy thriller, and you could walk away not knowing just how much your movie experience was shaped by the Pentagon or CIA. However, a trove of official documents obtained under US Freedom of Information laws detail the dealings between filmmakers and intelligence officials at Langley, Virginia, the CIA headquarters.
24.
Tell me where the device is!
A CBS series called The Agency.
Then he slit his throat.
They assisted a film called The Sum of All Fears, starring Ben Affleck.
Captain, Jack Ryan, CIA?
I am recruiting you.
Would I have to kill anyone?
Would you like to?
The Recruit.
Throughout the 1990s, the CIA worked with Hollywood very specifically on movies that portrayed the CIA as sort of a heroic force protecting America. Most of the movies were based on Tom Clancy books, actually. So you had A Hunt for Red October and that entire franchise. You know, the lead character, Jack Ryan, is this like super heroic figure, and he's like constantly, you know, taking down bad guys and saving America, saving the world from various threats, whether it's Islamic terrorism or the IRA or ultimately white supremacists.
Between them, the CIA and the US Department of Defense have had varying levels of input, from simply clarifying points for authenticity to actually writing parts of scripts on more than 1,800 movies and TV shows. When it comes to influencing filmmakers, shaping the story, the Pentagon is usually in a stronger negotiating position than the CIA. Because of the hardware at its disposal, it can shut down a movie before a scene is ever shot.
The Department of Defense is actually a much more powerful player in the entertainment industry for basically financial reasons. The Department of Defense has expensive toys. They have submarines, they have aircraft carriers, they have tanks, and they have the personnel to operate each of those things. So if a filmmaker wants to make a war movie, they often will approach the Department of Defense and basically ask to borrow that equipment. And the Department of Defense will say, maybe, but can I see your script? And they will either say, this is great, we love the way that the military is portrayed in this, we will go ahead and collaborate with you. Or they may say, we hate the way that we're portrayed and refuse to participate.
When the Pentagon does agree to support a film, there can be some scripting strings attached. And the Vietnam War is clearly a sore point. In The Hulk, a reference to a US operation that poisoned Vietnamese farmland was removed. And in the Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies, a suggestion that the US did not win the war was cut out. In Iron Man, a reference to soldier suicides was removed, again at the Pentagon's insistence. Hollywood is the only way the public learns about the agency, which begs the question, should the public be learning about the CIA from the CIA without even being aware of the agency's role in the production process? These issues became public with the release of one of the biggest CIA Hollywood collaborations to date, Zero Dark 30, a film about the search for Osama bin Laden.
You really believe this story? Osama bin Laden?
The Zero Dark 30 was a really unusual case, I think, for the CIA in terms of how it works with Hollywood. The CIA gave the director and screenwriter a lot of access to the agency. They bounced a lot of ideas back and forth, and they wanted to really kind of tightly control the narrative that this was putting out. It backfired, though, because very quickly after the movie came out, it was criticized for suggesting that torture somehow had played a role in the information gathering that led to the capture and assassination of Osama bin Laden.
Torture and the CIA's use of it, especially after 9/11, were already under investigation when Zero Dark 30 was released. The Senate Intelligence Committee wrote a letter to the production studio, Sony Pictures. They said, "We believe the film is grossly inaccurate and misleading in its suggestion that torture resulted in information that led to the location of Osama bin Laden." Zero Dark 30's director, Catherine Bigelow, eventually had to respond to the allegation that her film was making the CIA's case for torture.
The CIA rarely has any kind of public credit that suggests that they had any hand in shaping the narrative of that film. That lack of transparency I find incredibly problematic.
How about this? Why don't they just have at the beginning of each film, made with the support of the Central Intelligence Agency? Let's see how long the practice lasts then. Because it won't. Because people will look at it and say, oh, it's one of those propaganda films.
Academics like Alex Carey and others who've spent their lifetimes looking at how propaganda works finds that it's actually in Western democracies and open societies where you need the most sophisticated sorts of propaganda. And since World War I, thanks to people like Ivy Lee and Eddie Bernays, you know, propaganda has become a business, this business of public relations.
Is the CIA involved in Hollywood?
Yes.
Access will keep
Our government's always controlled our content.
the fight for freedom.
We've just never paid attention.
Freedom of
Their business is perception management, to manage public perception, public policy on behalf of their clients, whoever they might be.
America alone has more public relations propagandists than reporters, which means that nearly half of what people in the West hear, see, or read is written by professional liars. Professional liars whose job it is to keep people in front of their televisions, reading gossip magazines, eating vast amounts of toxic food, and shopping, always shopping, for the latest fashions and trends. That's the ideal for propagandists. And great efforts are made in trying to achieve and maintain that ideal. Anything that keeps the masses from organizing themselves and asking important questions about what their masters are really up to.
The average American is distracted, mindless, worried about minuscule things, celebrities, as if it was their own family members. And this is by design, because the powers that be, who own the media, know how our brains work. They know scientifically how the human mind functions. They know about sociology, and they are using the media, and have used the media for decades now, to entertain people with issues that don't really matter. When you have the big news networks covering celebrity issues as if it's the most important thing, it becomes the most important thing. And this is not by accident. This is to keep us out of the way. Because if you're worried about the latest celebrity death, or the latest celebrity couple, or the celebrity breakup, or your sports team having a shot at the Super Bowl or the World Series, there's so much information about those issues that can be discussed that will mesmerize people, and they won't know or care about the real issues that are out there.
지금 이 사람이 세계 신기록을
Has this man just broken a world record? Has he just created a medicine that can save thousands of lives? Perhaps he's been chosen to represent his community in some way. No, this man has just purchased a telephone. And these people, what is making them scream and cry with such profound joy? They are on a television program where they are receiving consumer items. This for some boots. This for some clothes shelves. And this hysteria is not because they have found God, but because they are receiving sneakers.
It's even infected our powers of imagination. We don't even know that we're sick, that we now worship materialism and the self and individual truths over the real truths.
So here we go. I'm about to make myself retarded. Who won the game? I want to watch TV. I want to watch more TV. Who won the sports?
You watch the media, everyone talks about that thing, the news of the day, and all the subconscious, really important stuff that's going on is being neglected.
By owning the vast majority of what we hear and see on a daily basis, we have been manipulated on a mass scale.
Now, you see, when your identity is defined by society, you cannot resist it. You don't have the knowledge, you don't have the wisdom, you don't have the resources to understand that something's being put over on you. You cannot but help believe the definition of you as a free agent. But you believe yourself to be a free agent as a result of not being free. That is to say, of being hopelessly unable to resist society's identification of you.
There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table to figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
The success of these mind-warping devices depends on their remaining hidden from the masses. That you see with your own eyes exactly how this war against the mind is used to turn Western citizens into compliant slaves.
A pioneer of modern propaganda was this man, Edward Bernays. Bernays invented the term public relations. He wrote, The intelligent manipulation of the masses is an invisible government which is the true ruling power in our country. He was part of a secretive group called the U.S. Committee on Public Information, set up in 1917 to persuade reluctant Americans to join the war in Europe.
And it succeeded. Within a short period of time, the propaganda efforts, they were called propaganda in those days, it was more honest use of terminology. The propaganda efforts of the Committee on Public Information, a very Orwellian name, did succeed in driving a pacifist population into raving anti-German fanatics, you know, to the point where the Boston Symphony Orchestra couldn't play Beethoven. It drove the country into a kind of hysteria. And the participants in that committee included many people of subsequent great distinction and influence. Edward Bernays was one. Another was Walter Lippmann, the leading public intellectual of the 20th century and most important figure in American media. Both of them went through that experience and learned from it and wrote about what they learned from it. What they learned, as Bernays put it in a famous book of his called Propaganda, late 1920s, I think, he said that we have learned that the intelligent minorities can engineer consent through the use of manipulation, propaganda, and control.
Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann go to Woodrow Wilson and say, look, man, if you're going to enter into this war, we are going to need to sell this war to the American people. And so Wilson institutes and creates the first modern propaganda machinery. It was actually quite brilliant in its conceptualization, so that the best way to persuade people is to grab them by their emotions, by their unconscious and instinctual urges. Let's not bother with pumping out facts. Let's scare the hell out of people. A picture of the Statue of Liberty in tatters, crumbled into the New York harbor with German planes flying around it. A picture of the world being gobbled up by the bloody hands of a gorilla wearing a German helmet. So, you know, it's not about facts anymore. The facts don't matter.
For Edward Bernays, public relations was like a war on people, on bending their will.
And we should do it for the benefit of the public. It's for the benefit of the public that we should control them and engineer their consent. And this is very significant because the public should not be participants in the democratic process. They should be spectators, not participants. They are ignorant and meddlesome outsiders, as he put it. And for their own benefit, we, the intelligent minority, the responsible men, must control them.
This is the Pentagon, which spends almost $1 billion a year just on advertising, recruiting, propaganda, the selling of war.
Anyone can dream. Making it a reality is the hard part. From the B-2 to the upcoming B-21, Northrop Grumman stealth bombers give America...
What the fuck?
The head of the Rendon Group, John Rendon, denies that he is a national security strategist or a military tactician. Rather, he states, "I am a politician and a person who uses communication to meet public policy or corporate policy objectives. In fact, I am an information warrior and a perception manager." Following the first Gulf War, Rendon was paid $23 million by the CIA to create anti-Saddam propaganda. Following 9/11, he was charged with public relations for the US bombing of Afghanistan. Rendon is far from alone. Public relations has mushroomed into a $200 billion a year industry, with PR flacks in the United States now outnumbering journalists. Propaganda has become the primary means by which the wealthy communicate with the rest of society. Whether selling a product, a political candidate, a law, or a war, seldom do the powerful deliver messages to the public before consulting their colleagues in the public relations industry.
In 1943, the following directive was issued from party headquarters to all communists in the United States. It read, "When certain obstructionists become too irritating, label them after suitable build-ups as fascist or Nazi or anti-Semitic, and use the prestige of anti-fascist and tolerance organizations to discredit them. In the public mind, constantly associate those who oppose us with those names which already have a bad smell. The association will, after enough repetition, become fact in the public mind."
I mean, there's no such thing as unbiased news, just like with any reporter on CNN.
Okay.
What they're actually doing is they're telling the person what to say. It's always like leading them in a direction before they even open their mouth. And the only people that we will let on the air, for the most part, are people that have a proven track record of taking the bait. Sad news doesn't do well with ratings, you know, like if you can get someone impassioned, that does really well with ratings. Sad news back to back to back doesn't do really well unless it affects them directly. COVID, gangbusters with ratings, right? Which is why we constantly have the death toll on the side, which I have a major problem, like the special red phone ring.
Yeah.
And they pick it up, and it's like the head of the network being like, there's nothing that you're doing right now that makes me want to stick. Put the numbers back up, because that's the most enticing thing that we have. Let's make it higher. Like, why isn't it high enough, you know, today? Like, it would make our point better if it was higher. It's fear. Like, fear really drives numbers. Fear is the thing that keeps you tuned in. No one ever says those things out loud, but it's obvious.
They are the indispensable ingredient, because without them, you can't have anything. You have to have mass propaganda to accredit and spread and pound the official version of the events into the minds of people, and to smooth over the inevitable absurdities, contradictions, impossibilities, and so forth of the official story.
If you could use propaganda for war, you could certainly use it for peace. And propaganda got to be a bad word because of the Germans using it. So what I did was to try to find some other words. So we found the word Council on Public Relations.
Bernays returned to New York and set up as a public relations council. He showed American corporations for the first time how they could make people want things they didn't need by linking mass-produced goods to their unconscious desires.
What Eddie got from Freud was indeed this idea that there is a lot more going on in human decision-making, not only among individuals, but even more importantly among groups, than this idea that information drives behavior. And so Eddie began to formulate this idea that you had to look at things that would play to people's irrational emotions. And you see, that moved Eddie immediately into a different category from other people in his field and most government officials and managers of the day, who thought if you just hit people with all this factual information, they would look at that and say, oh, of course. And Eddie knew that was not the way the world worked.
Bernays set out to experiment with the minds of the popular classes. His most dramatic experiment was to persuade women to smoke. At that time, there was a taboo against women smoking, and one of his early clients, George Hill, the president of the American Tobacco Corporation, asked Bernays to find a way of breaking it.
He said, we're losing half of our market because men have invoked a taboo against women smoking in public. Can you do anything about that? I said, let me think about it. And then I said, have I your permission to see a psychoanalyst to find out what cigarettes mean to women? He said, what'll it cost? So I called up Dr. Brill, A.A. Brill, who was a leading psychoanalyst in New York at that time.
A.A. Brill was one of the first psychoanalysts in America. And for a large fee, he told Bernays that cigarettes were a symbol of the penis and of male sexual power. He told Bernays that if he could find a way to connect cigarettes with the idea of challenging male power, then women would smoke, because then they would have their own penises. Every year, New York held an Easter Day parade to which thousands came, and Bernays decided to stage an event there. He persuaded a group of rich debutantes to hide cigarettes under their clothes. Then they should join the parade, and at a given signal from him, they were to light up the cigarettes dramatically. Bernays then informed the press that he had heard that a group of suffragettes were preparing to protest by lighting up what they called torches of freedom.
And so the next day, this was not just in all of the New York papers, it was across the United States and around the world. And from that point forward, the sale of cigarettes to women began to rise. He had made them socially acceptable with a single symbolic act.
It worked in the sense that it got lots of news coverage. It worked in the sense that women started smoking publicly, and in fact, smoking became a symbol of the new woman, of the emancipated woman.
What Bernays had created was the idea that if a woman smoked, it made her more powerful and independent.
My sweet embrace.
It made him realize that it was possible to persuade people to behave irrationally if you link products to their emotional desires and feelings. The idea that smoking actually made women freer was completely irrational, but it made them feel more independent.
Eddie Bernays saw the way to sell product was not to sell it to your intellect, that you ought to buy an automobile, but that you will feel better about it if you have this automobile. I think he originated that idea.
Out of this would come a new political idea of how to control the masses. By satisfying people's inner selfish desires, one made them happy and thus docile.
When you think about the entertainment industry, what comes to mind? Movies, TV, music, right? Let's talk about this entertainment.
I've been observing you.
What if this entertainment was more than just entertainment?
Now in complete control!
When you're driving home from work, what are you listening to? When you come home after a long day and turn on the TV, what do you see?
The U.S. are bracing.
Saying that they're one.
Think about all the content you've seen throughout your whole life. A lot of it has actually made us who we are today.
So you don't know what's really going on.
Have you ever stopped for just a second, though, and questioned the content?
There are now more than 52 million kids under 12 in all in the United States, the biggest burst in the U.S. youth population in half a century. And for American business, these kids have come to represent the ultimate prize. An unprecedented, powerful, and elusive new demographic to be cut up and captured at all costs. There's no doubt that marketers have their sights on kids because of their increasing buying power, the amount of money they now spend on everything from clothes to music to electronics, totaling some $40 billion every year.
But that's not where the real money is. Marketers and advertisers have realized that the real money related to the children's market is in their purchasing influence.
Any questions? Jared, does he do any tricks? Does that work for you?
Because of their purchasing power and because of their purchasing influence, marketers and advertisers have become much more deliberate in their strategies and attempts to how to influence those dollars.
Kids come first.
It's the children who often determine what kind of car gets bought, what kind of computer gets bought, what kind of cell phone program, and even where they take family holidays.
What's your favorite part of the Nick Hotel?
The awesome pools. Having my own room. The arcade rocks. I like the shops. I like eating with SpongeBob.
We came on vacation and the kids don't ever want to leave.
Astronomical $700 billion a year, roughly the equivalent of the combined economies of the world's 115 poorest countries.
Most parents and other people just don't realize how corporate marketers intentionally try to, well, in essence, make parents absolutely miserable. Corporate marketers have actually studied the whole nagging phenomenon, which corporations do nagging better, and they provide advice to corporations about, what kinds of tantrums work better.
Children sometimes say, can I, as much as 9 times.
Will you take us to Mount Splashmore?
No.
Will you take us to Mount Splashmore?
No.
Will you take us to Mount Splashmore?
No! And part of the nag factor is designed to help maximize the number of times children will keep asking and keep asking.
Will you take us to Mount Splashmore? Will you take us to Mount Splashmore?
If I take you, will you two shut up and quit bugging me?
Yeah, of course. Well, will you take us to Mount Splashmore?
Yes!
Thanks, Dad.
So these kids have a lot of power in the economy. The advertisers know it, and they are going after them in a way that is unprecedented.
This generation of children is marketed to as never before. Kids are being marketed to through brand licensing, through product placement, marketing in schools, through stealth marketing, through viral marketing. There's DVDs, there's video games, there's the internet, there are iPods, there are cell phones. There are so many more ways of reaching children so that there's a brand in front of a child's face every moment of every day.
What we have is the rise of 360-degree immersive marketing, where they try and get around the child at every aspect, at every avenue.
Comes in 4 great games.
Kids are inundated with this. They are buried in this media blitz.
Kids are now multitasking with media.
Hello. Hey girl, what's up? No way.
Say who you wanna plug in your iPod or MP3 player.
And they are more vulnerable and are bombarded with over 3,000 commercial messages every day.
Marketers know these are little sponges. They're so wide open. They want to get that brand loyalty for life.
It's about people wanting to convince our children that life is about buying, life is about getting.
Can I help you?
Yeah, I'm here to see this.
Go ahead.
So the philosophy becomes cradle to grave. Let's get to them early. Let's get to them often. Let's get to them as many places as we can get them.
Do you have a business card?
Sure.
Not just to sell them products and services, but to turn them into lifelong consumers.
I'll see you in about 20 years.
This media that we're consuming at such a rapid rate, we need to slow down and think about what we're consuming.
Bullshit going on.
What if the people in charge didn't have our best interests in mind?
They're coming for every second of your life. Their entire models are based off of growth. They cannot stay stagnant. YouTube, Twitter grossed $4-5 billion last year. It is in the red. It is unprofitable. It has to get more of you. No matter how nice it's trying to be, it is all that they're trying to get more engagement from you. We used to colonize land. That was the thing you could expand into, and that's where money was to be made. We colonized the entire earth. There was no other place for the businesses and capitalism to expand into, and then they realized human attention. That they are now trying to colonize every minute of your life. That is what these people are trying to do. Every single free moment you have is a moment you could be looking at your phone, and they could be gathering information to target ads at you.
Comes to their warfare, psychological warfare operations, and other forms of subversion. Strangle you with your own systems.
So you end up having junk food promotions at fast food restaurants, breakfast cereals with images of the main characters from the movies. You have bed sheets so that children literally go to bed thinking about the images. And then they go to school with their backpacks and their lunch boxes with the logos. And then they get to school and their friends have on the t-shirts and the shoes and they want them.
Hello, Scooby-Doo crackers.
Scooby-Doo? Do you like those?
Yeah.
Have you ever had them?
No.
How do you know you like them?
I love them so much.
SpongeBob SquarePants was Kraft's best-selling macaroni and cheese. I personally know a 5-year-old who told her father in no uncertain terms that SpongeBob SquarePants macaroni and cheese tastes better than any other macaroni and cheese. Now, how do you argue with a 5-year-old about that? I mean, what do you say? You say, well, no, it doesn't. And then she says, well, yeah, it does. Well, no, really, it does. No, it does. I know it does. Well, have you ever had SpongeBob SquarePants macaroni and cheese? No, but I know that it tastes better.
Growing up is a very strenuous, difficult, and sometimes hard and scary process for children. One of the things that gives them some stability and continuity in that is their attachment to touchstones in their lives. And among those touchstones are characters. Clifford the Big Red Dog, Mickey Mouse. These are constants in their lives. These are things that they have figured out, they feel they understand, and that they feel comfortable with, and indeed, in their own way, love. When you take that and you leverage that into saying, eat this food, you are basically leveraging that very powerful emotion that the child has, that very powerful attachment to make money.
To celebrate Walt Disney Pictures and Walden Media's presentation of The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you can get a pop-up storybook and an out-of-this-world action figure in every McDonald's Happy Meal.
But marketers have not limited themselves to dropping the names of beloved characters to sell their products. With increasing brazenness, they've also begun to drop the products themselves directly into kids' entertainment.
Oh, look at that!
Is it a mirage or just product placement?
Hey, who cares? With shopping convenience at such low prices. Water, Fresca, Mountain Dew, your product name here.
Product placement is weaving of products into programming without adequate disclosure.
Welcome to Wendy's. May I take your order, please?
Classic triple lettuce, tomato, and cheese.
Classic triple lettuce, tomato. I got it. Classic.
I'm gonna have chicken nuggets.
What kind of toys do you have?
And so it's dishonest advertising, it's deceptive advertising, it sneaks by children's critical faculties and implants its messages in kids' brains when they're paying less attention.
I mean, what Spy Kids had McDonald's as a plot point.
In 1927, an American journalist wrote, "A change has come over our democracy. It is called consumptionism. The American citizen's first importance to his country is now no longer that of citizen, but that of consumer."
They're exposed to so much advertising, they learn to ignore it. That's why advertisers love internet games. Not just ads, not just games, they're advergames. She can score with Skittles, race with Chips Ahoy, or hang out with SpongeBob.
It's part of this by any means necessary. I mean, we've got to get to the kid. We've got to make sure that that child is indoctrinated as a consumer cadet. So therefore, we got to get to them in ways that maybe they don't even know that we're getting to them.
And just on the micro level, we can see this all over the place all the time now.
The government, especially in the U.S., is constrained in what it can do to you. Is a private business constrained in the same way? No. Sadly, we haven't woken up and smelled the coffee and realized that the government is essentially now using private entities, supposedly private entities, despite the fact that it grants them money, gives them loans, gives them differential treatment under tax code, bails them out, influences them, is platformed by them, in the case of Silicon Valley, TV stations and stuff. We haven't woken up to the fact that the government has effectively found a reach around for the Constitution, which is private businesses that you can be compelled to do business with, that are enacting rules that the government, by the way, behind closed doors, fully endorses and in some cases even sponsors, that rob you of your rights. So for instance, BlackRock could say, well, in our properties you can't have a gun. Then there'd have to be a Supreme Court battle. Well, they're a private business. If you don't like it, if you don't like the fact that BlackRock literally bought every house in the town that you live in, if you don't like it, then you can move. Well, I don't have the money to move. Well, then just print more money. See?
The politicians and organized private groups proceeded to establish de facto what the framers of the Constitution had hoped to prevent. In the late 19th century, as the national economy became more tightly integrated, national economic groups, manufacturers, railroad companies, investment bankers, farm organizations, labor unions, reallocated their lobbying efforts from the states to the national government. By the early 20th century, the influence of these broad economic factions on policy making could be clearly discerned. They have drawn on both national and state governmental powers. They operate effectively in the defense sector, in many areas of agriculture, in many professional services such as medicine, dentistry, and hospital care, and in a variety of other areas such as fishery management and urban redevelopment.
The Rockefellers, they control Honeywell, they control Monsanto, they control Quaker Oats, they control United Airlines, American Airlines, just on and on and on. AT&T, they control just a vast swath of U.S. industry. And all the insurance companies, New York Life, Equitable, these are all...
These rich and powerful owners only make up 1% of the world's population. They have mastered the use of propaganda over 99% of the world's population, turning them into consumer slaves who work harder and harder to buy things they don't need. These consumer slaves are also made to pay taxes to their government, money which is used to develop new weapons for the pernicious invasions and occupations of other countries. In the last 5 years alone, they've given their owners more than $1 trillion for these illegal and immoral wars that can't be won, and are even encouraged to send their own children to fight them.
Killed, but your government has...
Since 1945, America has tried to overthrow 50 governments, many of them democracies. In the process, over 30 countries and their people have been attacked. And the result? Not one single undemocratic country has been turned into a genuine democracy.
Open the door! Get your hands up and come outside. Let's start, sir. Yeah, clear the house now. Let's sweep on down.
I want peace as much as you do.
The grotesque act of invading other countries, claiming them as your territory, and stealing their resources to keep your emperor, crown, or corporate owners in power used to be known as empire building. The latest propaganda slogan for empire building is globalization, a vague word with warm connotations of unification. But what it really means is the acquisition of other people's resources at any cost, and unlimited slave labor. Slave labor needed to produce the unnecessary goods sold to these slaves. Slaves to persuasion and influence.
A great new field for sweatshops to be opened up, so that these new industries which we're creating in Britain today will be destroyed as the old industries were. Simplified, rationalized machinery with a few white surveyors, and then the masses of cheap colored labor torn off the land and taken into the sweatshops to work and labor and cough their guts out with tuberculosis until they too are thrown on the scrap heap of the sweatshops. Is that worthy of Britain? Is that to be the future of Europe? And is this competition to be organized within our European brotherhood, bringing in these sweat fields in Africa into our Europe civilization, so that the financial power in one European country can use it against the financial power in another? All the great financial central power of the world now shifted from the city of London to Wall Street, New York, It is childish nonsense to say that a British government rules Britain. It's nothing to do with British government or the British people. The government of the world is the financial government, the power of money and of money alone.
For years, this has been a sad but familiar scene in the Ivory Coast. Children hack at pods of cocoa for the chocolate companies in an industry worth more than £60 billion a year. Last November, they told me they barely got paid, and untreated machete injuries are common. Many children are separated from their families and work far away from home.
I haven't seen my family for 3 years.
10 years ago, Nestlé and other chocolate companies signed a protocol promising to act against child labour. Activists are now impatient at the lack of results. During the cocoa harvest, we had no difficulty in finding children at work.
If this was happening here, we'd do something about it now.
Questo si chiama franco CFA. È la moneta coloniale che la Francia stampa per 14 nazioni africane, alle quali applica il signoraggio e in forza delle quali sfrutta le risorse di questa nazione. Questo è un bambino che lavora in una miniera d'oro in Burkina Faso. Il Burkina Faso è una delle nazioni più povere del mondo. Per il Burkina Faso, che ha l'oro, la Francia stampa moneta coloniale. In cambio pretende che finiscano nelle casse del tesoro francese il 50% di tutto quello che il Burkina Faso esporta. L'oro che questo bambino si infila in un cunicolo per tirare fuori finisce per lo più nelle casse dello Stato francese. Allora la soluzione non è prendere gli africani e spostarli in Europa. La soluzione è liberare l'Africa da certi europei che la sfruttano e consentire a queste persone di vivere di quello che hanno.
Nike makes most of their shoes in Indonesia, using teenage girls and paying them less than 40 cents an hour. The company has the backing of Indonesia's brutal military regime, which has committed genocide in East Timor. Nike makes no shoes in America.
Basically, you've got, an underdeveloped country with a repressive regime.
They will be working overtime hours just to get by. And when you're working up to 15 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week, your 2-year-old child just doesn't see you. They don't get to see their children.
The kids can't even go to school. How are you going to break a cycle of poverty and have real economic development if you have a whole lost generation of children that aren't even educated? We would go to different workers' homes. You got like 4 women sleeping in an 8x8 cement box.
You slept on a very thin mat.
The streets outside of your home are lined by open sewers, and what that means, like in the rainy season, you would have all that feces just float up into the streets and into your house.
The workers would have to share a bathroom with 5 to 10 other families.
$1.25 a day after you've paid for your rent, water, electricity, any major transportation costs, you're going to be left on average with roughly 7,000 rupiah per day. What the hell does that mean? That's going to buy you 2 simple meals of rice and vegetables, a bag of peanuts, a bottle of iced tea, and some dish detergent. And that's all you can get. And that's your reward?
Without a doubt. We found it out in the first week that we were there. There's no way that you can live on $1.25 a day and maintain your human dignity. When I see people like Tiger Woods get $100 million just for wearing the clothes, we're saying as a society, like this one individual, because they play golf well, is worth more than 700,000 people.
I'm walking down this dirt path into this village, and I see this massive pile of scrap shoe rubber that I later learned came from one of Nike's factories, and piles like that get dumped there all the time, and the end result of these piles is that they get burned in that village in the big open space where kids play, and the burning fumes I learned from the company that designs Nike shoe rubber will give off toxins and carcinogens. kids are paying the price. And they're the ones with the chest infections, and they're the ones that are going to develop cancer. Factory bosses are just brutal, ruthless, hired muscle to keep workers in line. And we met with one worker, Giulianto. He told us because he was union organized and he was trying to form an independent union.
He was threatened at gunpoint. He had his house ransacked. He was given death threats, and he had to flee back to his home village because, in fear of his life. This is literally a life and death issue. And this happens at all the factories.
Every worker that we talk to, there's this struggled with this fear, this culture of fear that just permeates the air. That, yeah, they want to tell you the truth and try and fight for their rights, but they also want their kids to have a father or a mother. They're dealing every day with the threat of losing their lives for doing this kind of work. I mean, they show tremendous courage in light of that. Dita Sari, who had been organizing Nike and Reebok factory workers at the age of 23 and was illegally jailed and put in prison and tortured.
In 8th of July 1996, I was arrested by the army, the local army in East Java. They kicked me and they used their fists and their sticks and their boots to hurt me and to torture me in front of the workers to show them an example.
Private special interest groups gain the application of government authority to enforce compliance with their cartel rules, which is essential to preclude the free riding that normally jeopardizes the success of every arrangement for the provision of collective goods to special interest groups. And their participation as prime movers in the formulation, negotiation, adoption, and administration of economic policies backed by the full power of the government. The government gains the resources, expertise, and cooperation of the private parties.
The United States lost 1/3 of our manufacturing jobs since NAFTA. 70,000 factories. They have to come back.
It's unacceptable to me, and whether it comes down to being pharmaceuticals, metals, plates, anything, I think it's of utmost importance that we keep it here.
We need jobs! 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 Flint needs jobs! Flint needs jobs! Flint needs jobs! Flint needs jobs!
It's Nike. I'm 37 years old. For 25 years, I've been wearing Nike. Nike means that much to me. Flint should mean that much to you.
We don't make them here, we shouldn't buy them.
There's a lot of people in Flint and all over Michigan that need jobs, but especially in Flint. And I'm one of those people.
We're hard workers in this area. We've been working a long time. 5 generations, 4 generations of hard workers putting cars together. We can put together your tennis shoe.
The people in this country are sick and tired of seeing their jobs go overseas. And that's exactly where these jobs are going.
They want to take our jobs away from us, close down domestic generic pharmaceutical manufacturing in the United States of America. They want to offshore the production and the products, and then they want to tap back in and resell them to our citizens in the United States of America.
Personally, I was numb. I feel heartbroken.
I cried for a couple hours.
We were notified by Viatris after the merger of Mylan and Upjohn that Viatris intended to move the entire production of the Morgantown, West Virginia facility to India.
So it went from being the best interest of the people and the quality of the medicine and you and your families and the local and the community to being of the best interest of Viatris, which meant shareholders, which would mean we can make more money elsewhere.
This plant is a world-class facility, and I'll tell you why. Because if you have a thyroid problem, we make the stuff to fix it. If you have seizures, we make the stuff to fix it. If you have migraines, we make the stuff to fix it. Our workers are the best in the world, and I'd put them against anybody.
We are very, very good at what we do.
Zero recalls out of that facility.
We need those jobs here, and especially good paying jobs like this job.
Hey, that's the system. Deal with it, suck it up. It's capitalism, survival of the fittest. Guess you're not the fittest. Nike is in Indonesia for one reason: cheap labor.
I am basically there to make money. I cannot and do not look at the social consequences of what I do.
We can't be relying on the rest of the world. We need to be self-reliant.
What happens if we're at a time of war and we can't get medicine back here?
The bottom line is, how many more jobs and how many more plants do we have to lose?
I want to know why. Why is everything over here being taken away? A company that makes billions of dollars a year, you're shutting the facility down? Are you freaking kidding me right now? You know, as a veteran, it pisses me off. It really does.
And the participatory part is an acknowledgement of the trappings of democracy that are used here to lend legitimacy to all of these arrangements. As long as people get out and vote, then you know, you can do anything to them. They've had their say, right?
I'm not a big fan of politicians. They tell you what you want to hear, and then as soon as you leave, they forget about you.
Are you going to talk about unemployment today?
Why, of course. It is the one problem that really matters today. We live in a period in which politicians are not very popular. And believe me, you have my sympathy. Politicians are regarded as people who have learnt to talk, but not to act. And you demand action.
Since the early 20th century, in the national emergencies associated with war, economic depression, rapid and accelerating inflation, or large-scale labor disturbances, the national government has responded by adopting policies that consolidate power at the top and extend the scope of its authority. With power more concentrated and more actively employed, the incentive is greater for latent private interest groups to organize, increase their membership, suppress their internal disputes, and demand a voice in policymaking. Far from resenting such a private coalescence of interests, the government usually approves, encourages, and sometimes even sponsors it.
Governments have gotten big and bossy. They're spending more than at any time since World War II, so they control more of what you earn, and you control less. They've caused inflation by borrowing and printing $500 billion, which has ballooned the assets of the billionaires, the debts of our children, and the cost of living of the working class. Over half of families now say they struggle just to feed themselves, and more 30-year-olds live in their parents' basements because they can't afford the now typical cost of a home, $800,000. Meanwhile, a small financial elite with access to all that printed money buy up real estate and rent out to a growing class of permanent tenants, people who may never be able to afford a home. And when people speak up, the powerful clamp down. They silence and slander anyone who dares dissent, including with laws censoring what you see and say online.
We're living in very precarious times. We're living in an inverse world in which the suppression of vital information, which is of public worthiness, is being suppressed by the legacy media. I don't even call them mainstream because they're all going to collapse, like all of the corrupt institutions are going to collapse when this great lie comes out. There's serious vitriolic anger in the air, and it's going to manifest, and it's not going to be good for any citizens. This is not a lunatic fringe. This is people who are very well versed, very well researched, and are aware as to the plans of the global elitist cabal that have plans over the course of this decade to completely abolish every single element and the concept of freedom. It's the freedom of your own body, freedom of bodily autonomy, the freedom of travel, the freedom of association, the freedom of human expression. They want to incorporate people into a transhumanist movement. And whilst that seems very far-fetched for a lot of people, it's what they have in plain sight. Go look at UN Agenda 21, look at UN Agenda 30, look at the WEF. It's all there in plain sight for the average Joe Soap to find out this information. We're in World War III, silent weapons for quiet wars, because future generations will have absolutely nothing. They will not have ownership over their own bodies. They will not have ownership over their own future. They can only dream of owning a property. You know, the WEF was the #1 plan until 2030 is you will own nothing and you will be happy. You know, that's pure communism, lads. If people don't own any resources, who does own it? The state? A state which is a bastion of corruption, which is a banana republic in terms of a lack of accountability. Who is holding these bastards accountable?
And in the recent days, we've heard representatives in the higher echelons of government ask us, well, are you afraid of your own government? Well, to tell you the truth, I am. And all of us should be.
I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like, we had entire training courses.
In other words, observing how different countries operate, what is controversial within their systems, how does their system function, how can we use those systems to twist things around, to cause chaos, to mess things up, to use it against them. You say you believe in free speech? We'll have protests in your own backyard calling you out. You say you believe in free press? Well, we'll start up state-run media in your country, and we'll use those state-run media to lie to your population, to spread our propaganda. That's what they do. You believe in free markets? How about we bring state-run companies that can sell below cost and put your companies out of business and take over your industries? That's what they're doing, right? Strangle you with your own systems. And what is controversial in the United States? What is most controversial? Racism. This race narrative, they know they can use it. They've been doing it for a very long time.
By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat.
You are looking at a group that has worked to bring about a dissolution of national sovereignties on the road to world government.
What are they trying to do, Congressman?
Well, their objective is to try to bring about a gradual transition in our society, a dissolving of sovereignty, and a moving steadily to the left on the political spectrum.
To develop an overall strategy for America in this period when really a new world order can be created. It's a great opportunity.
A world government that will destroy anyone who disobeys them.
Three warfares doctrine: psychological warfare, media warfare, and legal warfare. This is publicly adopted into their military doctrine. This is part of their military system. Now, what are these? Psychological warfare is not necessarily lying to you. Psychological warfare is altering how you interpret information.
This reality has been forced upon us. We are drugged out. We are following other people's opinions. We are controlled by the media. We need to be free thinkers, then we need to learn how to feel free. We don't even know how to feel free or think free.
What is media warfare? Media warfare is the manipulation or control of outlets of information, not just news outlets, but say social media, online platforms, the ability to speak openly. Anything that would allow people to communicate would be a target of media warfare. And what is legal warfare? Legal warfare is a manipulation of international legal systems.
Soros makes huge bets on whole countries and economies. Last year, when he saw cracks in the Asia boom, he began selling the currency in Thailand. Traders in Hong Kong followed suit, triggering a financial crisis that plunged much of Asia into a depression.
In the last 2 years, you've been blamed for financial collapse of Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, and Russia.
All of the above.
All of the above.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister of Malaysia said that the region spent 40 years trying to build up its economy, and along comes a moron like Soros with a lot of money, and it's all over. He called you a criminal.
This man is a carnivore of the first order.
Soros wrote a letter to the Financial Times of London saying he thought the Russian currency should be devalued by as much as 25%. A few words from Soros were enough to cause panic selling that fueled the crash.
Now, the people with power, the media, interest groups, corporate giants, government authorities will fight tooth and nail to keep on top.
Time to remove your footprints. Agenda 21 is coming soon.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
The deep state. So these governments are actually giving up their leadership to these people.
Humans are now hackable animals.
You know, the whole idea that humans have, you know, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. So whatever I choose, whether in the election or whether in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's over. We have the technology to hack human beings on a massive scale. Yeah, I mean, everything is being digitalized. Everything is being monitored. In this time of crisis, you have to follow science. It's often said that you should never allow a good crisis to go to waste. People could look back in 100 years and identify the coronavirus epidemic as the moment when a new regime of surveillance took over.
When the government is imposing unusual restrictions or requirements on the citizens, as it always does during major emergencies, it needs to create the perception, if not the reality, that these burdens have been accepted, better yet, proposed and chosen by those who bear them.
There are several key mind manipulation techniques which are very, very powerful propaganda tools. The most effective and the most powerful, and it's used on us all the time, is something I call problem, reaction, solution. It's a mind manipulation technique that avoids not only opposition to what is the goal of the manipulators, it actually manipulates people to demand they do what they want to do anyway. It works like this. You start by secretly creating a problem in the world and making sure someone else is blamed for it in the public arena, in the public mind. It could be a run on a currency, it could be a government collapse, at its most extreme it could be a war. The problem's created secretly. You then use the media, which isn't difficult, to wind up public opinion in relation to your manufactured problem.
China has identified the cause of the mysterious new virus.
Coronavirus.
To the point where public opinion utters the classic words, something must be done, this can't go on, which is always followed by, give my power away, what are they going to do about it? And at that point, those who created the problem and got someone else to be blamed for it wound up that public reaction, then openly in the public arena, in the parliaments of the world, in the newspapers and on the television, offer the solutions to the problems they have created. And in doing so, they get vast numbers of people to demand what they want to do anyway. For instance, if you want more cameras in the streets, crikey, they're going up all over the place in Britain. If you want more cameras in the streets, you want a more armed police force, you want more authoritarian laws, greater erosions of freedom, and you want the public to demand you do it, then get the public frightened of crime. Either let society break down so there is more crime, or emphasize crime to be worse than it really is in some areas. Get people frightened, and the first thing people do when they're in fear about something is they look for someone out there to protect them from what they're frightened of. So, get people frightened that they're going to be burgled, get people frightened they're going to be mugged in the street, and they'll demand you take the freedoms away. They'll demand cameras in the streets and more authoritarian laws.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised.
What truly matters is not which party controls our government, but whether our government is controlled by the people.
For decades, the Washington establishment created globalist policies to move America into the global economy, led by Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum.
We reach an all-time high in food prices, as every housewife here knows. But the farmer who produces that food receives the lowest percentage of the market basket dollar he's ever received in history. And his debt in relation to income is at an all-time high, higher even than on the eve of the 1929 crash.
People are downsizing. The American dream has effectively been downsized by globalism, by socialistic world policies. And by the way, the centrality with which these economic systems operate is not capitalistic. It is the exact opposite. When the government, the empowered taxpayer-funded institution, has the power to empower third parties to screw the population, it can't be capitalism. It can't be a free market. In a free market, I can compete with BlackRock. In the non-free market, the government throws free money their way. I can't outbid them. It's designed to price you and me out entirely and make us into slaves.
Just wait. They are not the first to be in this world. They're not the first to plan to own the world. They're not the first.